Hello, me again. I'm now looking at how to do the same as the last video, but with VBA. So in the last video what we did was we looked at seeing how we can have this set of data here, and where the items in this column here, the yes or no column, say yes, and the cells are visible, we want this cell here to show us the sum. So in the last video I showed you how to do that with a helper column and using a table and the total rows for the table. And obviously we're showing the total row on that helper column, but we hid the total row. So if I bring back the total row, we see that's 60. Although the total of all visible here is 200, the total of just the yeses is 60, and that's what that cell there points to. It points to the value of that total. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at how to do a similar thing, but using VBA. So what we have here is we have that same list of data. So if I select all here, we'll see that we have some of them different categories, and we also have some of them yeses, some of them nos. And what we want to do is we want to sum up just the ones that are visible, which also fit into the yes category. Now, what we're not allowed to do is to filter out the nos. This particular question wants the nos to still be visible, but wants to sum up in that cell there the visible which are also yes. And the VBA that I've got to do this is fairly simple. So let's have a look at the actual code. And what we have here is I've just created a new a macro effectively, so a subroutine, and it's called the SumVisible. And I've called a variable my SumVisible, and I've set that variable to be 0 to start with. I've then gone in and selected the cell A4. Now the reason I've selected A4 is because I know that A4 will always be in my data set. Even if there are no items in that data set, that will still be relevant. And why we've done that is because we then use that cell to work out how many rows there are in total in the current region. And I then take away 1 from that number, because that then gives me the total number of rows of actual data within the region. So you can add extra rows on here as you please, because we're using VBA. So now that we have the number for the total rows, we're going to start at number 1, and we're first of all going to offset down 1 row below our A4. Now that will take us into the first row of actual data, and the key thing about this is it will do that whether the data is visible or not. So here, with row 5 filtered out, my VBA code will still go down to row 5, and the reason is because row 5 is still there, it just has a height of 0. And so that's what hiding rows, or filtering by hiding, actually does. So it switches the row height to 0. So bearing that in mind, what I'm now going to do is I'm going to look and see if the row height is greater than 0. And if the row height is greater than 0 and my selection value, remember I'd selected A4 initially, and now I've come down 1 cell from there, so I'm now in A5, so I'm looking at that cell there to see if it says yes, as well as having a height. So if it either doesn't have a height or has a value of no, then it's going to ignore this next bit, it's going to skip over it. If that is correct, it's going to add to my SumVisible, which is currently 0, the value of the offset 1 to the right, which is of course the value of my sales. So this will carry on, it will loop through the code, keep doing this for all of the items until it gets to total rows, and then what it does is it takes cell C2 and it puts in the value of the accumulated total, and then it finishes. And if I go back to my sheet here, what we have here is when I click that update, that runs the code. So I've just set a macro and assigned it to this button, and that has instantly run through here. It's checked all of these to see just if they're visible, and that cell there also says yes. And in those instances it then takes this and it adds it to 0, and that becomes the current total. Then comes down to the next one, adds it to what the current total was, so that makes it 60, comes down here, 110, 140, 170, and there we go. So let's just put a different filter on there, click the update, and that is now working. Okay, this is not a better way of doing it necessarily than Bill's or Mike's, it's just another way of doing it. I hope you found it useful, and once more, thank you for listening.